All right, so we're recording at this point just so folks can kind of keep up with us. I don't want folks to get left behind. I don't know why they're out, but we left off on page 136. And what is the name of the document that we're working on?
Ancient Adventure? Is that it?
New Classes Report. And it looks like this, okay? And if you scroll through it, you'll see that table that we built at the very bottom, okay? So what we're talking about on page 136 here is we should have deleted some information here. And let's just double check this because I'm a little bit further than this. You should have deleted one of the rows in the table but added it to the first row. So it should say adult fitness and diabetes prevention. And then on the left-hand side, you can highlight whichever row you want to delete. I've already done this. But there was a row that said diabetes prevention. And if you click, and then you can delete the rows. But it should look like this. Again, I'm a little bit further ahead here. If you turn to page 137, you can kind of see, I think you guys did stylize your files already, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go over to the bottom of page 137, and this is a bit of a review, but if you notice on my screen here, I get a left and right facing arrow if I put my insertion point in a certain spot. And if I do that, I can click and hold and drag things around and make it look different. I don't want the arrow like that. I want those two split arrows. And if I make the column too narrow, you can begin to see how this looks. So what's the right way to do this? It's actually a trick question because there is no right way to do it. Caitlin, the way that you want to do this might be a little bit different than Bethany, and so on and so forth. So make your table look good. That's really what I want to make sure, that it looks good to you. If you want to know how to automatically size it, you get the arrow facing left and right, and then double click it. It'll turn the left column into just wide enough. And so this is just wide enough. Again, I don't really care what you do. I just want to make sure that you know how to change the size of the columns there. So do what you think is right, but you should know how to auto fit, which is that double clicking. Arrow pointing both directions. Left click quickly. And how many people have a colored table, some kind of color on their table? Everybody? Okay, all right. So we pretty much have that whole next few pages completed here. I want you to ignore the section on page 141 and 142 that talks about the border painter. I think that's a goofy tool. I wouldn't recommend using it. If you're that particular, there's some other very cool drawing programs out there for computers. This probably isn't the time or the place to spend much time with that. So this is good. If you submitted this in a document, what I have on my screen is perfectly fine. It's a little messy because I've got those paragraph marks on, but if I turn those off, this is not bad. This is not bad, okay? It doesn't detract from my report. That's what you want to make sure of. Ask yourself, does this help or hurt my report? And if you really like wild and crazy colors, ask yourself, would Lynn like this? Would Jack like this? Think of somebody that you might not hang around with very much. Like, ask yourself that question, and it'll give you the answer that you need to have. Okay, questions on the table? All right, so we're going to flip over to page 144. And on page 144, you'll see the images of, well, it says headers and footers. What's a header?
Top of the form or introduction of the form.
Very top, right? The footer, obviously, is the thing that's at the very bottom. These are separate from your document itself, okay? It's a little bit like the letter. The body of your letter is different from the inside address, and the body of your letter is different from the closing and signature lines and all those sorts of things. So the middle part is your report. The top and bottom of it are called the headers and footers. It's gonna. How many of you use those? Do you guys use those? Whenever I do documents anymore, I almost always use the headers and footers, mostly because it gives me a little bit extra space at the top and the bottom to put stuff. Sometimes I put pictures and not words. So think about that. And I usually don't put pictures of myself there. That's a joke. Okay. All right, so flip over to page 146. Tab stops. How many of you have used tabs when you are creating a document? You probably use them and you don't even know sometimes. How many of you know how to control where the tabs show up? Usually people don't know how to do that. And that's kind of what we're going to do a little bit of experimenting with in this section. And if you look on page 146, it's giving you some examples of left tab stops, center tab stops, right tab stops, decimal tab stops, bar tab stops. Should you memorize all these things? I wouldn't. Don't memorize them. It's not really worth it. But what you should know how to do is to control where tabs get placed, okay? Because they're going to get confusing eventually. But if it's confusing, simplify your work, okay? When would you use tabs instead of a table? When would you use a table instead of a tab? I don't want an answer. I just want you to think about that as we do this, because sometimes people get a little bit confused. I'd say get really good with one of them. All right, so on page 147, we're going to enter a list of consultants using tabs. So think about what we just typed here in the table that's on the screen here. And this organizes your information in columns and rows, right? So let's see how the tabs compare. So on step 1 on page 147, we want to make sure you've got the new classes report open, and I do. You can see that at the top. And, okay, we've resumed reading. We already have our document open. We want to make sure we're in the print layout. Where's the print layout button? Very bottom, okay? So make sure you're in the print layout. This is the read mode. That's print layout. That's web layout. We want to be in print layout. The middle button at the bottom. Change your view so it's good for you. Mine's set at 96%. Make it bigger, make it smaller, whatever it is that works for you. And then on step 6, page 148, we want to click to the right of the last E in Susie Blake. So where's Susie Blake at? Anybody see Susie Blake? There she is. So it's about 1, 2, 3, like 3 paragraphs down. There's Susie. Okay, so her name kind of sticks out there all by itself. Okay, close to the top, but not quite. So I've got Susie's name there in between the Rivera Public Health Consulting and the Benefits of Health and Fitness classes headings. So we want to place the insertion point to the right of the E in Susie Blake. Okay, so it's blinking, 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 blinking right next to the E. So to the right of it. And now we want to press Tab. And if you have your paragraph marks turned on, you'll see that arrow that indicates a tab, and now the insertion point is just to the right of it. Okay? So we don't really care how this thing got there right now, but it's considered a default, right? You didn't do anything. It's just where it went. Cool? All right. So it says in step 8 to type the word senior consultant. So type the word senior consultant and then press the enter key. And now we're going to type step 9, Emmanuel Iglesias. Okay. And then press the tab key. Step 10, type the word senior consultant. Press the enter key. And in step 10, type Carolina Sheffield dash Basinger. Press the tab key. And then this last person is a project manager. What's that?
I hit too many tabs.
Okay. You can click in there and press the backspace key, and it should get one of them gone. That work?
No, I forgot my spelling. So it's me.
So you should have one tab,
The
and
tab should get it to the bottom, to the next row.
enter takes you to the next row.
Okay, that's right. Okay, I didn't even hear it.
Okay.
Whole new level.
Nope, you're good. And this is a really common thing for people to do. So to make a list like this, hit the tab key, and then don't do this, but let me show you what 95% of the students do, okay? Watch my screen, okay? I want these to line up like our table, and this is what folks do. I'll get that one lined up with that one. Oh, no, I gotta make it more because the project manager at the bottom is longer, and then if I add some spaces here, they're not quite lined up, but they're pretty close, right? That's what most folks will do, is they'll use spaces to line things up. Now, what's the problem? Okay, here's what happened about 30 years ago. Do you guys still use typewriters at Job Corps? Like manual typewriters, use the paper, right? Okay, so what happened with computers is when we started using computers instead of typewriters, there's this thing. You guys ever hear of Steve Jobs? Okay, the guy that made up Apple, stuff like that. Well, he came up with these things called proportional fonts. Okay, so proportional fonts change based upon the size of the font and the type of the font. But in the old days, when typewriters happened, you got what you got. When you hit the button, it literally was a physical key that hit ink and went onto the paper. But computers changed that so that letter A's got wider, I's maybe got narrower or wider, depending. It changed everything. It changed everything. So we don't have the ability to use spaces to line things up very easily anymore. There's a couple of exceptions to that, but we don't use that because they just don't add up anymore. Because it depends upon what words you typed. So instead of having these spaces, okay, we're going to do it a little bit differently. Okay, so we want to add a new tab stop to the horizontal ruler on page 149. And before you do this, I want you to look at the picture on page 149, and I want you to see exactly how theirs looks. That's what you're gunning for here. So we want to highlight, okay? We need to highlight the whole thing, and then we're going to do some business to make that all work, okay? So we're going to highlight it. Make sure the Home tab is displayed on the ribbon and select the list of consultants and their titles. That's step 1. This is really important that you choose the entire thing. If you leave anything out, it's not going to work right. So we've got all 3 lines selected. Step 2, on the horizontal ruler, what's horizontal? Up and down or left and right?
Up and down.
Horizontal is left and right. He was trying to trick me. So, once you find the horizontal, does everybody see their ruler? How do you get to the ruler if you can't find it? View. Yes, go to the View tab, and it'll be a little checkbox in there, okay? So on the horizontal ruler, click at the 2.5-inch mark. Because the current tab stop alignment style is left tab, Word inserts a left tab stop at that location. Remember that when you set a new tab stop, all the default tab stops to its left are removed. So the column of title shifts to the new tab stop. So blah, 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 blah. That's what I hear when I read all that. So let's actually see what happens. So if you haven't done this already, don't. Watch my screen here. Okay, I'm going to go to my mouse. And what line did it say to go to? 2.5. Okay, so there's 2 and there's 3. So in the middle of that, and I'm going to click one time here. Nope, that didn't do it. That didn't do it. There we go. So I'm looking to make that left tab stop right there. If you go right into the middle of the ruler, it might not actually work. So it looks like I had to click just beneath it to make it work. So in the instructions, it says to click at the 2.5-inch mark. Make sure that your pointer is just beneath that ruler, though. Real touchy. You want to see that again? Does that work, Frankie? You got it? You're way ahead of us, aren't you? Caitlin, that work for you? Okay. That's it. So that shifted everything over and it lined it up perfectly. That was so easy. So why wouldn't we do it this way? Why did we use the tables in the other one? What's the diff? There was a little bit more information in the other one. What was the other thing that we did in the other page? What was the last thing we did? What was that? Yeah, you added a bunch of style to it, right? So flair, you get some bling out of the deal. So with this approach, you kind of don't get all that extra styling information for borders and all that other jazz built into it. So you'd have to go in and kind of build that in yourself, and it really wouldn't be worth it. So with this, if this is the approach you want to take, typically you're not going to do a lot of styling with it. Now we do have a couple of other things we need to do here, because these things need to be pushed closer together. Okay, so make sure you have everything highlighted still, just like in the book. And this is where we're going to use that tool that we used in the letter. Go to the line and paragraph spacing, make sure everything's there, and we want to do what? Yep, and so if I do this, what just happened?
Moved all the spaces out of the paragraph.
It was, yeah, okay. Exactly. We only want to get the first 2 because that's going to do too much, right? So let's just pick the first 2 and then see what happens. Boom. Okay. There's other ways to do this, but this is probably the simplest way, and you don't need to memorize every way to do a job. You just need in the beginning to know at least one to do this job. But that really looks pretty darn good. Like, it's very simple. It didn't take a lot of work. We did not use multiple tabs. We only used one tab. We didn't use any spaces, and everything is lined up. So practice that on your own for other purposes, and people will think you're a genius if you can do that in your own reports. Kind of serious. There's people who work at this institution here who get paid money, who've done office jobs for 20-some years, and they do not know how to do what you just did. Sounds crazy, but those basic skills are sometimes things that people don't already have. So let's flip over to page 150, creating footnotes and endnotes. What's a footnote? Just guess.
Like
Yeah, like a PS at the end of something. Jack?
or what they do on the side in add comments to a paper or whatever.
Okay, maybe there's like some comment-like things at it. They're technical terms, but they're both generally going to be at the bottom of a page. They're not going to be at the end of the document necessarily, but we'll see a little bit how these are going to work here. So if you flip over to page 151, excuse me, 151, and you'll see this in some books sometimes, not always, but sometimes you'll see it in a book. Use the navigation pane to find the phrase improved financial prospects on page 1. So I'm just going to do Control F, improved financial prospects, and it's actually pretty close to the bottom of the first page. I chose to press and hold the Control key, the F key, which brought up that pane on the left, the navigation pane, and I typed in improved financial PR, and it took me to, looks like the third to last line on page 1. Work? And you could just scroll down there if you can't find it using the find tool. So I've got my spot chosen. So I'm going to make sure that, okay, there's my improved financial prospects. And we want to click to the right of the period after prospects. So not after the space, after the period. So there's a period and there's a space. You want to be to the right of the period, to the left of the space. And that's actually pretty important. So if you did not do that and you were submitting a term paper that was supposed to include these footnotes, you would probably be marked wrong. So sounds really goofy, but it's just very specific. Okay, so I'm right. So this is the bottom of page 1, Jack. So it's like the third line before the very end. Improved financial prospects. See it? So if you can't find it, do a Control F and then type improved finance and make sure you're looking at results. You see it?
Oh, there it is. Found it.
Mine wasn't the same spot either.
Okay. And again, we want to be to the right of the period before the space at the end of that sentence. And then in the References tab in the ribbon at the top, so click on the References tab, we want to find the footnotes group. So the footnotes group, so it's table of contents, footnotes, and we want to insert a footnote. So it's the big button that says AB with a red 1 next to it. And when we click on that, it inserts some goofy line with kind of dots around it. And on step 5, it says type for more information, see blah, blah, blah. For more information, comma, see, keep your bank account healthy, period, double quote, at for your health.cengage.com, period. Those little periods at the end of URLs always drive me crazy. I probably wouldn't put that in. If you look at my screen here, that last period, I don't like to put that in because if somebody copies that URL and they include the period after the com, guess what happens?
Doesn't work.
It doesn't work. So consider your audience. If you think they might actually copy and paste that thing or think it's part of the URL, you might just want to leave it out of there. I think that would be easily justified if somebody said there's a missing period. Okay, so bottom of page 151. Does that make sense though? So that's an example of a footnote. What happened in the place where you had your insertion point? Do you see? So look back up there where we first clicked, and you can see that there's a superscript number 1. So it kind of sits up above that line there. And if you hover over top of that, it actually tells you what you just typed. Does that work for you? See that number 1? No, you don't need to do anything with it, but you should see that there's a number 1 in your document now. Do you see it? It's exactly where you should have had your insertion point. So to the right of the period and before the space after the word prospects. You guys all see it? No? Yes? Sonia's already got it.
You saw how bad my paper was.
Did you find it?
Yeah.
All right. Let's see what's on.
Keep moving around on me.
Find it, Lynn? All right, so go to the end of this page.
I'm up there.
Nope. Okay, so let's go over here. Whoa, where'd that go?
Yeah, Mike kept moving around on me too.
Oh, you're down here. Okay. So there it is. No, that's okay. That's all right. So there's your little 1, and there's your.
One and my proper spelling.
Okay.
I
So,
got 3 pages now.
so it's there.
Okay.
But that's an example of a footnote.
Okay, so you know where to look for your footnote.
Yeah, so I'm just going to look for the footnote. I don't really care where you put it, to be very honest, but I think it's important to know that where you put your mouse and click to choose insert footnote, that's where it goes. So it gets attached to that spot. Okay, so if you were writing a term paper on Mickey Mouse, and then you had another section that had Donald Duck, and you clicked in the Donald Duck section, and you talked about the Mickey Mouse in your footnote, that really wouldn't make much sense, would it? So you should have your insertion point where it belongs. Okay, and Lynn, yours wasn't a case of that. It was those paragraphs where they were in 2 different places, so don't worry about it. Don't change it either. Okay. We want to insert a second footnote, but this time it's going to be interesting. So at the end of the 3rd line of the same paragraph, so find wherever your footnote is, find that spot, and then I want you to find where does it say? In the 3rd line of the same paragraph, click at the end of the 2nd sentence to position the insertion point to the right of the period after syndrome. So find syndrome. So we want to go after the period. So metabolic syndrome should be just a couple of sentences before that. And you can see where I'm blinking right there. So that's where my footnote is going to be. Now what's interesting is that I'm going to insert a second footnote before the first one. So you could probably guess what's going to happen here. I'm going to click same thing, insert footnote, but what it did was it renumbered the original one that we've created, and now I need to type some stuff in here. Metabolic syndrome is a cluster of something, of conditions associated with heart disease, comma, stroke, comma, and diabetes, period. So when I click insert a footnote, it reordered them for me, just like those numbered lists work, okay? So footnotes take care of themselves. If you could have actually typed this manually yourself, But the problem is that if you insert other ones in the middle, then you have to go back and rechange everything, which is crazy. So don't do that. And you don't have to memorize this. You could watch a YouTube video, and in 1 minute, it could show you how to remember how to do this. So just remember what's possible, because I think sometimes that's the most important part of this class. So once you've got your second footnote, did it work?
Oh yeah, I'm laughing at my spelling.
No, it's okay. All right. So once you've got your footnotes there, I want you to save your work, and then we're going to flip over to page 153. Okay. Hyphenating. What does it mean to hyphenate a document? Stephanie, how would I hyphenate my name? Could you hyphenate my name? Not really. Why can't you hyphenate my name? You shouldn't hyphenate names, actually. But generally speaking, you need to be able to break them down into syllables. And one of the things that you can do is definition of bibliography. Okay, so we'll do a definition of this. And what you can do is you can see here, this actually gives you the ways that you could hyphenate that word. So you see the dots in between the bib and the li? That's a place that it could be hyphenated. Between the li and the og, that could be hyphenated. Between the g and the ra, you could hyphenate. So how do I know this? The nuns used to paddle us if we didn't know this when we were in 4th grade.
Pronunciation.
We had to take tests on how to hyphenate words. I'm sure that's not done in schools anymore, because computers do this for you. But oftentimes if you sound it out, bibliography, there's 5 syllables in there, so there's probably 4 different spots where I could potentially hyphenate. That's not always true, but if you have a 1-syllable word like Matt, you can't really do that. It doesn't make any sense. Unless you're from Kentucky, because sometimes they say, Maya. They turn into 2 words, 2 syllables. Yeah, it's pretty cool. My sister lives near, in the border between Kentucky and Tennessee. And my niece, when she says the word pie, it has 3 syllables. It's crazy. It's like, takes like 5 seconds to say the word, for her to say the word. It's crazy. But it's like, and she gets really embarrassed, but super thick accent. So let's see how simple it is to do hyphenation here. So on the ribbon, if you go to the layout tab, go back to our document, back to the layout tab, it's very simple. Under page setup, there's no hyphenation happening here. And if we wanted to see what this looked like, we could choose automatic. And if I do automatic and then I go over on the right-hand side, periodically I can see these dashes show up. So it automatically changes those for you. I don't think I actually want you to leave hyphenation on because, I don't know, I don't like it. I think it makes documents look really messy. So I'll let you decide what you want to do with it. But make sure you've saved your work. Okay, on page 154. So go to page 154. And on page 154, it talks about inserting a section break below the table. What's a section break? I don't even know what they mean by it. I know how to use it, but I don't know how to describe it to people. A section break kind of allows you to do different things after that point, but it doesn't make you necessarily go to another page like the page break does. Page break's kind of obvious. A section break, not quite so obvious. I think of all the things that I ever see with documents that people bring in, if they have section breaks in them, it can be really, really, really confusing. And sometimes people come in with dozens of section breaks in their document and they don't even know it, and they're frustrated. But it can really create havoc. So if you're using them, just make sure that you know what you're trying to accomplish. So in this particular case, they want us to go all the way to the end of the document. And the way that we can get there is to go to Control and End, or you could scroll and go there. Generally, the end of your document should be at the bottom of that table that we created. So we've used a page break before, and what did it do? What did a page break do, Caitlin? Yeah, it just cuts it off and sends you down to the next page. Actually helped you, didn't you? You over. Okay. All right. So we don't want to do that though. We want a section break. And if we go to the breaks in the control page setup group, and then go to the breaks little button here. So we're in layout, page setup, breaks. There's a whole bunch of different breaks that you could use here. I'm not going to bore you with these because there's so many different choices here. I just want you to know that there's a whole bunch of choices. So choose wisely. If you don't know what you're picking, you may want to figure it out, especially if you're going to give it to somebody else.
Wouldn't newspapers use this more than?
Yeah, that's a really good example. So newspapers might use it, magazines, if you're writing a magazine article, so where you could get to the next spot, basically. All right, so we've got our breaks. You can see exactly what's in this page here. It's giving you some information on the ones that we're going to be using. So the page break, section break new page, or next page, and section break continuous. So the page break section of the gallery include options for controlling how text flows from page to page, blah, 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 blah. You can read just as well as I can, but really, if you're not working in a document and seeing how these things behave, might not be all that helpful for you to even spend much time with it right now. But we want to go under the section breaks next page. So pick carefully, next page. It looks like it's a page break, okay? But it does a whole bunch more mumbo jumbo for us. So we've got our next page. If I scroll back up and I look here beneath my table, I can see that it says section break next page. You guys see that? That's how you know if you did it right. If I keep adding them, it might get crazy in my document. So that's why having the show hide paragraph turned on, it becomes really important, because then you can kind of see if you got what you need or not. Is that working? Are you at the bottom of the table? And do you have your show hide invisibles turned on? That's the backwards P in the home tab. And you can see all those crazy characters and stuff like that. So click there. And then go back to layout. And then you don't have any breaks. Okay. So let's click that arrow and show tabs and commands. Okay. Where is your, click down here again. And now it shows up.
Okay, that was weird.
Yep, not sure why.
Yeah. I can do it this time, I honestly say. So then hit next page.
Continue, or section break, next page, yes.
Why wouldn't it show up?
Oh, you're over here.
layout. I don't know either. Let me fix it for you, and then we can kind of troubleshoot it later. Let's do this.
No.
1, 2, 3.
That's the fucking one that was trying to get me to
And that gets you out where you need to be.
Still
Oh, there
fucking
it
shit.
is. Okay.
She's fucking batshit crazy. One thing. She's still not fucking computer change in 2 weeks.
Not perfect.
Yep.
It'll be good.
Okay. So we got tables. We have a last blank page now. And one of the things I do is I actually zoom way out so I can make sure that I can see that blank page. Wow, wow, wow. So if you make it super duper small, you can make sure that you've got that blank page. And I do. Okay. And let's make sure that we are on that blank page. So your insertion point should be flashing on that very last page. Ba-boom, 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 ba-boom. See it? If you're not on the last page, make sure that you have a section break next page at the bottom of your table. Okay? Those are the two really important things. And then make sure it's flashing there on the last page. And then what we're going to do is look on page 155 with the picture. Look at the picture. And you can see that there's the first pages of the report are in portrait mode. In other words, up and down. The very last page is going to be left and right. So it's going to be flipped on its side. Normally, you cannot do this in a Word document. You can't just switch the orientation of one page. The magic button is to make the section break. Okay, so once you do the section break, it allows you to do other magical things to certain parts of your document. And we're going to do this again in another activity in the module 4. So kind of keep this one in mind. So on page 155, we want to scroll down and verify the insertion point is positioned at the top of new page 4. That's step 1. Mine is. Okay, and Lynn, just make sure yours is in the last page, and you can see it flashing there. On the ribbon, click the View tab. Make sure you're in the View tab, and then make sure you're in multiple pages. Okay? So click on the multiple pages, and that's kind of in the middle on the View tab, under Zoom. And then on the ribbon, click the Layout tab. So once you click the Layout tab, it's going to give you some options here for orientation. Remember, we're flashing on the very last page, and on the left-hand side under Orientation, flip that last one. Okay, I'll show you that again. Flip that last one. So all of them didn't change, just the last one. If you didn't put the section break, they're all going to change.
So it should be in layout.
Yep, Layout, and then Orientation. See it? And did the last page change? Great. Okay, so you have 3 pages that are up and down, and the last page is going to be left and right. So why are we making the last page left and right? Landscape.
Picture maybe.
Yeah, there's going to be a picture of some sort on here. Okay? And this is where we're going to get into smart art. How many, show of hands, how many people kind of want to do some PowerPoint? Yeah. right? So because it's a creative, artsy sort of thing. And this is where the smart art crosses over. So if you look on page 156, the smart art is a toolkit that's part of a lot of the Microsoft Office applications, including Word and PowerPoint. So we're going to create a pretty simple graphic here. So if you want to be a rock star, no matter what, if you're applying for a business loan, if you're putting in a paper that your teacher wanted you to make, if you're making a flyer for your club or trying to sell your car, this looks awesome. I would strongly suggest using these tools because it's so professional, like really easily. So make sure your insertion point is on that last page at the top of page 4. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this because it's just a little bit too small for me. And then you can kind of see what I'm doing here. But on the ribbon, I'm going to click the Insert tab. This is so simple. But if you click Insert, and now you're looking for the Smart Art. Where is Smart Art? Okay, it says it's in the Illustrations group. Looks like it's right there. Smart Art. And when I click on the Smart Art, it brings up a pane, and you can see that picture at the bottom of page 156. So that's the Smart Art graphic pane. And there's all sorts of things that you can scroll through and check out here. And really, you could kind of lose days worth of time in here. So when you see a really fancy report, usually they didn't do it from scratch. I knew this guy. He was a vice president here at CWC, and little secret, he used to make the president of the college kind of feel a little stupid sometimes because he would come in with these great presentations. And he said, no, I spent most of the night up last night working on this thing. There's no way you'd be able to do this yourself. And it turns out this is all he was doing. So I had this president of the college in a class, and I showed her how to do this. She was so mad. It's like, she looked at me, she says, that's it? And I said, yeah, that's it. She goes, I'm going to kill him. I mean, she didn't mean that, but it was really funny because he was using it to make himself look really good, which is great. And you could do that same thing with your presentations. So we're wanting to look for on the left pane in the relationship section. And then once you have relationship, it boils it all down. And there's fewer choices on that middle section there, but they want you to find the converging radial graphic, first column, 7th row. So first column, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, something like that. Which one is it?
Right down below you there.
There we go. Converging radial. So it gives you some pointers here. Normally, you're not going to have somebody tell you which one it's going to be. You're just going to look through these and find the right one. You have 2 or 3 different things you want to show here. So it gives you all of that to the right. There's also a description of what it is you could do with that thing. So you can look through all those. But once you click OK, it brings up a box kind of on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side, that's the graphic that gets inserted into your document. Now you'll also notice that at the very top, you have Smart Art tools that show up. Design and format. Don't click on anything right now because you want to use the tools that are on your screen. And on the left-hand side, normally what folks do is they'll get rid of this box right here. They just immediately get rid of it. But this is the one that makes it really easy for you to type the stuff that you want to have show up here. So bottom of page 157, they want you to type better physical and mental health. Okay? Better physical and mental health. Better physical and mental health. And then press the down arrow key, and it takes you to the next one. and type the word exercise. Flip over to page 158, press the down arrow key again, and in this one we want to type good nutrition. And this is just a really simple example of what you can do here. Press the down arrow key, and we actually don't have another one. And so the simplest way to do this is just to press the backspace key, and it will delete that for you. So make sure the graphic design tools tab is still selected. Okay. And click somewhere inside of the graphic in a white area. You want to be able to see all these little drag handles still. Okay. And now at the very top of the screen, we want to go to the Smart Art Tools format. This is going to give us some other little doodads to be able to adjust this thing. So we want to change the size of this. So I'm going to show you a couple of different ways you can do this. But if you click on the size arrow on the right-hand side, it shows right now that this is 3.5 by 6 inches. That's just the default. And we want to change, in the height box, we want to change that to 6.5. You don't need to keep the double quotes, so if you want to retype that whole thing. And then in the width, we want that to be the number 9. And then once you press the Enter key, it changes everything about it. And then if I zoom the other direction, I get a sense of what that's actually going to look like. So the other thing you could do is you could drag one of the corners of that Smart Art graphic, and you could change that way as well. So watch what I mean here. So the other thing you could do is you can change the size just like you would a picture. I would not click one of the middle drag handles though. I would always click on a corner and make it look good. If you make it too large, it's going to take up another page, so just be careful about that.
Where did you go for the Smart Art format?
At the very top. So if I click, so watch what I do here. So if I click somewhere outside of the graphic, it goes away. If I click inside the graphic at the very top, the Smart Art Tools Design and Format tabs are at the top. So click anywhere in the white space in your Smart Art graphic. Show up. Okay. And then we go to Format, and then on the right-hand side, that's where the sizing is. But if you want to do the drag handle thing again, you could do it that way as well. They're telling you what size to make it. It's just a little weird.
How many times have anybody ever told you exactly how to make a picture on a piece of paper? What do they tell you? Make it fit on the paper, right? They do that in kindergarten. Like, yeah, here's your one piece of paper. Don't glue 14 more pages together, right?
They don't tell you exactly what size to make it. It's fitted on the page. All right. So if you look on page 160, is there anybody need any help with that? There's a lot of creativity. If you chose a different Smart Art graphic and you wanted a different color and different shapes, do it. Like, if that's interesting to you, do it. Okay? Page 160, this is basically what I'm looking for, though. So I'm looking for like 3 pages, or Lynn, you might have an extra page on yours right now, and that's okay. I don't really care. But you should have some pages in the beginning. They should be in portrait mode, so they should be like a normal piece of paper, up and down. And then that last page is really important that it be oriented in landscape format, so wider left and right than it is tall. So the last thing we want to do with the actual document is we want to get a footer for the entire document. So we want to go all the way back up to page 1. So find page 1. And then at the very, very bottom, so almost off the page, so below your footnotes, I want you to double click in that section below your footnotes on page 1.
I'm on page 3 or 2.
That's where your footnotes are?
Yeah.
That's fine. Yep.
So double click above it.
Double click below your footnotes, or at the bottom of the page. So then you can kind of see here, that's the area. So you could do that on any of those first 3 pages. Doesn't really matter. So a footer is going to be applied to all of those pages all at one time. So if you do it on one, it's going to be on all of them. Okay? Does that work? Okay. So you can kind of see you're in a slightly different mode here. So once you've done that, they want you to type on step 3, page 161, type your first and last name and then press the enter key. So Matt, her, and press enter. And this next step here, I use this a lot. So in the header and footer group, click the, what does it say? Click the page number button. Okay, so find the header and footer on the left-hand side, and then there's a page number button. And when you do that, it's going to list some different sorts of things here. So we can put page numbers at a lot of different places, but in this case, we want to go to the current position, and then it gives us some styles, and they're telling you to choose accent bar 2. So there's different styles you could choose. That's the one that's going to kind of go with this whole document that we're building right now. Does that work? Okay. You didn't have to style any of that because you just picked one of their pre-designed formats, which is pretty cool. You might have spent half a day trying to figure out how to get it set up that way. So in the navigation group, step 7, it says to click the next button. And folks miss this step frequently. So click the next button, okay? And it takes you to the next section. So how many sections do you have, should you have in this document? 2. So you've got the first few pages, and then you inserted the section break to make the last section, okay? So you've only got one section break making 2 different places for you. So we are in the second section, and that's the footer for the next part. Okay, and if you look real closely, it even tells you there. It says footer section 2. Okay, it tells you that. So you've got that. If you flip over to page 162, it says to verify the insertion point is located in the section 2 footer area at the bottom of page 4, so the last page, and that the header and footer design tools tab is selected on the ribbon. So step 2 says in the navigation group, click the Go to Header button. If you click the Go to Header button, it takes you up to the header, okay? But we're on the header on which section? 2, okay? So there's 2 different headers too. So for the footer, we chose to leave them both the same. And we're not going to do that for the header here. So it says on step 3 here, it says in the navigation group, click the Link to Previous button to deselect it. Okay? You see it where it's kind of highlighted right now? So it's like a light switch. Right now it's turned on. So it's linked to the previous one, which means they're both going to be the same. You have to unlink. And you unlink it by clicking that button and ungraying it. And now, step 4 says, in the navigation group, click Previous. So if you click on Previous, now it takes us to section 1. Okay? So if you go to section 1, step 5, it says, click the header button. Okay? Step 5, page 162. Click the header button. It's over here. And it gives you a bunch of styles. So you don't have to do a lot of formatting here with this. And it's in step 6, it says go down to the grid style, the 8th one from the top. So we're looking for the grid. It's going to look something like this. And again, you can get all crazy with it on your own documents. This one time you might just want to stick with the plan. And in the document title, so if we click one time on the word document title that's in the brackets, it highlights the whole thing, and then step 8 on page 163 says to type recommendation for classes at Vista Grande Neighborhood Center. So once you get all that typed in there, so that's going to be the header for section 1. So what should be on the header for section 2 right now? Nothing, right? So just to the right of what you just typed, I'll go slow here, but just to the right of whatever it is you just typed, we want to click on the date. So once you click on the date, you'll notice a little arrow to the right of that, and that brings up a calendar. And you can do whatever you want to. You can choose today. You can click a certain day there, because February 14 is my favorite day. Not really, but you can pick that day and that year, or click today. Whatever. It doesn't really matter.
So click date.
Click on the word date, and then there's a little arrow to the right of it. See it? And then it brings up calendar, and all you got to do is clickety-click. And you don't have to type any of that stuff. Sometimes I use tools like this, sometimes I don't. Now the last thing that you don't really have to do, but you can see there's a big red button at the very top in the header and footer tools that you can close the header and footer. If I scroll back down to that last page, you'll notice that I have a footer but no header. And the reason is I don't want that header to detract from that image, that smart art graphic that we put in there. Preguntas, por favor?
Please what?
Questions? Okay. Frankie knew what I was saying. All right. So page 164. This is where I think this is kind of cool, but I'm easily amused. The cover page, though, I think this is the best part about this whole program is it does all this stuff for you, which is pretty sweet. So make sure your document is still zoomed so you can see all of the pages. Okay. So make sure you can see all the pages. And now what we want to do is we want to go to the Insert tab in the ribbon, and we want to click on the word Cover Page on the very left-hand side of that ribbon. When you click on the word Cover Page, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of options here. All sorts of different things. And you don't really, there's nothing in particular here, but the one thing to keep in mind is that we did choose the grid format for a couple of our choices previously. So if you pick the same option, the formats tend to go together a little bit more expectedly, I guess. So do whatever you want here, but I'm just going to pick the grid, and look, presto, I got this awesome cover page on here. I'm going to zoom the other direction so I can actually see it again. And mine looks remarkably like the picture on page 165. So notice I turned off hyphenation. Remember a few pages ago I said you could do whatever you want, but if you left hyphenation turned on, the neighborhood is going to get hyphenated. All right?
So what's the easier way?
Yeah, so I think this looks better like this. Okay. I'm going to skip down to step 10 on page 165. Click the document subtitle on the right-hand side. If you click that one time, what they're saying in step 10 is you can type in the Rivera Public Health, not health, Consulting Okay, and then the last thing that we're going to do here is below the document title, the all capitalized thing, draw your reader in. So if we click on that, we want to actually get rid of this. So if I right click on this thing, I can just choose remove the whole thing. And save your work. And when I go through my document, I'll zoom that direction just so I can kind of see what it's going to look like. What do you think? I'll zoom in so I can kind of see the whole thing. Is there any extraneous things on it? Doesn't look like it. My header seems to be correct. Don't see any wackadoodle things on it. My footer is present. My header is missing from the last page on purpose. And if I do this very, very, very last thing, oftentimes a document like this would get printed. I don't want you to print this, but I want you to just watch what I do. I go to File and Print, just so I can kind of see how that would show up if I were to print it. But I don't print it. Even if I just sent this to my instructor, I would want to do this so I knew how it was going to work out. Because I don't want that last page to get split up into two. Everything else looks okay. And I'm going to say, save my work. Okay? Cool? So don't forget the most important step, though. Turn it in. Yeah. So make sure you turn it in. So I've got my document. I'm going to close it now. I'm going to go back to our class and let me get logged in. I've definitely gone back and regraded all the things in Module 1 review. So if you have not turned something in, you won't see a grade, or you'll see a grade of 0. So if you would like the opportunity to turn that in, most of you have done these things already. So if you've got nothing, let me know so we can get it all set up for you again. But again, Module 1 is all done. And I'm going to get logged into our class. Ultraman. So we're going to go to whatever week this is. And so which one is this? Module 3? Okay, so it's this module, tutorial module 3. And I'm not in student view mode, I'm in instructor. So that's the one that you want to submit the new classes report for and do a file upload for me. We do not have class on Monday, but you're responsible for the review on page 169 and 170. There's 18 steps So if you want to get started on it sooner rather than later,
I do usually check my email on the weekends, but if you get going on it sooner, this stuff will be more fresh in your minds, and I think it'll be easier to get it done quicker rather than waiting until the last minute.
and it'll be a similar document that you create, just a little bit different. Cool. Questions? It's really great having you guys as students. I'm serious. This is a really good class.
Can you handle this real quick?
Absolutely. Yep. Okay, let me, if there's no other questions, let me stop my recording here.